As a young boy reaching the age of around 10 years old with a great family background, an older sister and brother, I found being the youngest is often boring, as my elder brother and sister would always be out with their friends, and with my parents working the late shifts I would find myself being alone in the house a lot. So it'd kill my time on the once famous AOL chat site, but this particular evening it was tiring and I had logged out and got myself some food and drinks and returned to the computer and decided to start checking around on the web. Back in those days the internet was super slow and the computers was just as bad to match. I had become curious of many things growing up like most kids my age, and decided to start checking out about ghosts, as I would often seeing dark shadows and having strange nightmares. Eventually I stumbled across a web page to which had symbols unknown to myself at the time. I just thought, oh, Egypt reading. These very same symbols have now been discovered worldwide in caverns, caves and alleged alien spaceship debris. Pictures can be seen in our gallery. But at the time I just thought, oh, it's a research site or a student's homework assignment or some blog I have stumbled upon. As I continued flipping through the pages listed Doc 1, Doc 2. It was all pretty much the same, more and more odd shapes and symbols, some small that was like a language writing and some big that used a whole page, that now looked to be like the world-famous crop circles which also appear around the world in fields and farmlands. I came to the last Doc 5. This one was filled with what now strikes me as government papers. There was a strange logo at the top center of each of the pages. The writing on some of the pages had been blacked out, some fully visible, and yet some only had addresses and names blacked out. Mostly I seen dates and words regarding about U.S. warships, about sightings and disappearances, also many pages with the words "to be destroyed" printed in a fine gray-looking stamp diagonally across the page. They all had been similar. One particular page even had a list of around 50 to 60 names, and all had agent with a code next to their names and dates. Also it stated that they were deceased or MIA, and not knowing what I was seeing at the start, I suddenly became aware this is something very strange, but being young and foolish then, am now looking back wishing I had taken pictures of my monitor or somehow stored them on a floppy disk, as they'd have possibly gave a lot of people justice and a much needed truth to the public. I was quickly rushing through them up to the point where my screen suddenly went blank. I fiddled with the VGA wire connecting the monitor, knowing I could still hear the computer humming and the LED lights flashing. I thought, oh, it's crashed, so I casually bent down to hold in the power button and wait for it to turn off. The computer had powered down. Not so puzzled by this at the time, as again running what is now an old computer on Windows 95, it was very common for them to fail. So once my computer had rebooted back up, I tried hard to search for the web page to show my brother and his friends who had visited that evening to see what they would think of the site. But to my surprise no such site could be found. So I thought I would just check internet history, see what I had previously typed into the address bar. As no good search engines also existed at the time, you pretty much had to rely on knowing the web address yourself. But even the internet history was blank. I remember thinking, had my computer corrupted the web browser when it had crashed, as it was completely blank of any websites ever even being visited? As the hours went on, I had returned to the AOL chat and the whole thing went out my mind. But later that night, with our whole family in bed including myself, I was awoken by the computer activating itself. Yes, they was loud enough back then to wake you from your sleep, with a fan whooshing and a bleep as it booted. The screen lit up and appeared the Windows logo, making it bright in my once dark room. I stared in my bed and then turned around to face my computer. No one was there. My first impression was my family was using it. I then got out of bed, walked over to the computer, thinking this is strange. The mouse pointer on the screen had then began moving. I wasn't touching the mouse and nor was the mouse being moved, but the cursor on the screen was clicking into the documents folders whilst running a black command screen with some type of coding written into the window box of CMD. I panicked, hitting keys on the keyboard in a random fashion and moving the mouse. I had no control, So I began holding down the power button and waited for what seemed an extremely long time for it to turn off. It had no effect. I then reached down to the plug sockets, pulling the power cable out. That worked, but within the seconds of me doing that I heard a door sounding like it was being slammed outside the house. As I quietly rushed down the stairs to not wake up any of my family, or even worse, disturb an intruder inside the house, I went to go to the front window, pulling back the curtains whilst hearing the revving of an engine and screeching of tires. I just managed to get a glimpse of an all-black van slightly smaller than your average transit van racing off down the street. Although I had a good view due to our house being on top of a hill, it had soon disappeared around the bend at the bottom of our street. This had really shaken me up, and I can still remember the whole incident. I didn't want to wake up my family, as I had seen enough movies for them to think I would have just been dreaming or imagined it all. Yet this is still nothing compared to what was about to happen over the next couple of days. Waking up in the morning to see the computer had immediately refreshed my mind of the whole experience, but still remained in keeping my mouth closed. Our usual family business went on, and as I left for school, leaving the house, I had noticed there was a B.T. engineer on the back of a cherry picker looking like he's fixin' wiring on our local telephone pole for several houses in our area with a jumble of wires. He seemed to be quite busy. Not thinking anything further about it, I went on with my day. When school was over, I repeated my usual routine, except when I was home there was no dial tone on our house phone and no internet connection. Remembering earlier that morning they appeared to be tampering with the phone lines, I dismissed it as a typical fault and would no doubt be repaired. So T.V and snacks is what I chosen to do until my parents returned home, and then chores and homework. But when going bed later that night, I was awoken yet again. Except this time not by my computer but by a couple random flashes, something which you'd expect from a camera flash. They appeared to be coming from our back garden, as that's where my bedroom window was facing. A beam of light again had quickly flashed. There was no bad weather that day or even expected through the night, so I could rule out thunder and lightning storms. Curious by this, I again crept out my bed. However, very worried of the previous night's incident, I scarcely approached the window. It was so silent. I always slept keeping my windows closed, so I knew I only had to take a peep. Very hesitantly I tried to peer around the corner of my window. It was pitch black at first. My eyes struggled to see anything through the net curtains. So I also slowly pulled them back, and there at the bottom of my garden, just over the wooden fencing, I could see the top half of two men in dark clothing. As my eyes began to focus, I could see one was clearly smoking. Their eyes were black with shades. Thinking to myself, who wears sunglasses at night? The more my eyes focused on them, I could make out they were wearing suits with black ties and white shirts. They were both staring right back up at me. As I was about to step back to run, I quickly looked down to below my window and got the shock of my life when I seen another man. Although he was wearing a suit like the others, he didn't have a hat or the glasses. He was bald and couldn't see any facial hair either. His jaw was slightly elongated than the average person, with a pale white to pinkish complexion, and he stared right back up at me. Frightened by this, I jumped back from the window, heart beating 1,000 times a minute. I didn't waste no time in running into my parents' bedroom yelling, "Get up, there's men in our back garden." My parents, somewhat confused being suddenly woken up, took some convincing to even go and check. But within a few short minutes my mum was at the bathroom window, to which also faced out into the back garden. My brother and sister, coming out their rooms, also investigated, going to our back door, looking around, gates still closed, nothing looked disturbed. They all ignored me and refused to believe, or if they did believe, they assumed they're not there now. My parents insisted we all go back to bed, which we did. Me holding tight onto my quilt for the remaining of the night, and surprisingly, although terrorized by the whole situation, did eventually sleep. I still insisted over breakfast the next morning that they were men, and explained what they looked like in case they saw them too. They laughed it off, and of course this was expected. And as the days passed, my usual routine continued, always looking back every now and again on the incident, wondering if I'd ever experience something like that ever again. Will they ever come back for me, and what did they want? All I can assume is that with the internet only in the early stages of being introduced to the world in 1990, I'm sure it would not have been fully established to have been used by our government offices for a couple of years after the initial launch. This happened in 1995, so had our government not had enough skills and experience with computers, were they unable to manage to encrypt and secretly be able to transfer their files safe from public viewing? Why name their site and files as obvious as Ghost Project, as that was my original search? Did maybe an agent make a mistake? Would they have hurt me if I wasn't a young kid? All I can say for sure is there's secrets out there our government don't want us to know about.